Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the only podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history, and its people. Your host, Roberto Mazza, will bring you guests discussing their relationship with the Holy City. A journey through history, society, feelings, and hopes for the future. Follow the podcast on all social media platforms at Jerusalem Unplugged.
Welcome to Jerusalem Unplugged, the podcast dedicated to Jerusalem, its history and its people. I'm your host, Roberto Mazza, and today my guest is Maya De Vries. Maya is an ethnographic researcher. Her interests are in social media, digital activism, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and Jerusalem Al-Quds. She's teaching at the Swiss Center for Conflict Resolution and at the Department of Communication at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Maya loves documentary making, and she believes in the power of this genre in order to create waves of change, and she's involved in the Israeli-Palestinian cinematic project. She's currently working on a long-term ethnographic research in East Jerusalem, focusing on aging and elderly and their relations with digital platforms. Maya, welcome.
Hi, Roberto. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Super exciting to be here with you.
Maya, the only and first question I always ask to all my guests is, what is your Jerusalem? In other words, what is your connection with the city?
Well, what a vast question. I'm not sure that I have one answer. Maybe I'll come to it from my personal perspective. I was born here in Jerusalem, but my parents came back to their hometown, Tel Aviv, when I was 6 months old. So I didn't grow up here in the city, but as an adult, as an Israeli adult, to be honest, I felt that I must know the city through walking its streets. So I chose to come here, to study here, and I stayed. I stayed for the past 13 years. I live here, and I feel, I would say, very calm here. It's sort of a dissonance because it's such an hectic, contested space. But something with the mountains makes me feel calm most of the time. And we will speak about it probably further down the road here. But I would say it's the connection to the mountains. That's my Jerusalem.
I found it fascinating that you're talking about Jerusalem as a calming place. I must say that my own experience is of a hectic and I would say complex. I don't want to delve into other terms, but it's a complicated place to go around. So
it is.
I think it's pleasing to hear that there is another dimension, to see the city also from the perspective of something that may calm your nerves. Looking at the mountains, which I guess it's a possibility, right?
Yeah. I agree, and that's why I said it's a vast question. But if I want to take the positive side of life, which I usually try to do, so that would be my first choice to reply to your question. That I'm happy to be here, to be part of this contested city. I would use the word contested and not just complicated city, because it is contested. And as an Israeli, I probably can say much more freely and easily that it is a calming place for me. I'm not sure if I was a Palestinian living in the city, I can answer, similarly. that it is a coming place for me, but I don't know. I'm not a Palestinian. I live in the western side of the city, in a very calm neighborhood full of families and parks. And you can, open the door and sort of turn your gaze away from the conflictual situations in the city. So that's why I think I have this choice of saying to you, it is a calming place for me. I think something in the Corona period, in the Covid-19 period, this crazy, crazy year we all been experiencing around the globe, made me look at the topography of the city kind of differently, because all of a sudden the way to the university, to Mount Scouts, was, it's not relevant. The university is close. We are just inside our computers from home teaching. And all of a sudden I had, I would say, a different geographical experience of the city. I was using less the car. I was walking much more. I was experiencing my neighborhood. I was using all of a sudden the Armon HaNatziv promenade, where you have the UN headquarters. I don't want to say like I discovered the city, because I didn't. I know the city. I live here for 13 years, and I walk around also in the east side and also in the west side. But I think that, the fact that we were all forced to be in one spot for so many days gave me that different perspective of a sort of discovery or rediscovering the neighborhood in a way. I don't know if it's a bit too amorphic. I have two boys, elementary school, their age. So, we had many, many days at home, as you can probably imagine.
I guess we all share, those of us with kids, enjoying more time, but also other problems at home with kids.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by the fact that several times you mentioned your walks around the city, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and indeed we're going to talk about COVID, that it is part of your work. But I want to focus on this question about walking around the city. Maya de Vries walking around Jerusalem. What are your eyes seeing? How's Jerusalem filtered through your view?
The city is sort of divided. As people might know, maybe hearing your previous podcast, or also just reading about Jerusalem and about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, you have here the eastern side and the western side of the city, and they're not connecting, although they are connecting, because people cross sides. Palestinians cross the side much more because they have to work in the western side of the city, and Israelis go less to the east part of Jerusalem. However, when you are deciding as an Israeli, as a researcher, as an ethnographer, that you really genuinely want to see what's going on the other side, then you must cross the borders, and you have, or the unseen borders, I would say. The fact that I speak Arabic helps me a lot. It reduces the fear, just in terms of walking around the streets and understanding what people talking around me in Arabic, and obviously having the possibility to develop conversation, with people around you in shops, etc., etc. So it seems like a very simple thing to do, but actually it's not. It's not obvious here to speak Arabic. So I would say walking the streets of Jerusalem as a secular person, first of all, brings out the fact that I am secular. I feel as a minority in the city. I know it sounds a bit awkward, maybe, but it is a very religious space, and it comes out in the clothes and also in the color, that people are just wearing. It's much more modest, and it's less. It's not shouting, "I'm here." On the contrary, people are sort of veiling themselves. Not necessarily just Muslims, but also Jews and Christians. It's very modest. So I think, this is definitely one thing that I felt from the very first year that I came to live in Jerusalem, and I sort of got used to it. There is another, I would say, an artifact or an object that I think that I see a lot when walking down the streets of Jerusalem, no matter which neighborhood, etc., which is it's the scarf. So it might be the fact that I'm a woman and I see it as a woman also, but I use the scarf myself much more after living in Jerusalem. So it's also because it's just much more colder here, even in the summer. So you have to, cover your shoulders and your neck. But also, if you're wearing short sleeves and all of a sudden you feel uncomfortable as a secular, the scarf is very, useful in these moments. And when you cross borders, again, doesn't matter which neighborhood, okay, Jewish, religious, Israeli, Palestinian, never mind now. I felt that the scarf was it was my friend many, many times. And it's really difficult for me to leave the house without a scarf.
I am amazed by your description of Jerusalem in terms of colors, and reminds me of the stark contrast of this so-called Jerusalem white stone, and the character of a city of being white. But it's true, when you walk around, black or
It's
dark
black.
colors are the dominant colors. I mean, between the Haredi Jews, but also Muslim women's veiling and Christian pilgrims who tend to wear dark clothing, and regardless, men and women, they tend to cover themselves with this kind of like dark color representing the passion of Christ, particularly if they tour the city through a pilgrimage. Something I never thought about it. It's impressive.
Really. Thank you. I mean, we're doing here, like, we're generalizing the reality, but still, I grew up in Tel Aviv, and it was so different in terms of colors. It's just you have this, you occupy yourself with how you will come across when you walk out the street. And again, talking from my personal perspective and experience, as a teenager, as a young adult in Tel Aviv, etc. But I think my kids feel it as well when we come visiting my parents in Tel Aviv. They already get the difference. The last holiday was a proof. The Purim, people are even costuming differently. So yeah, it's black, but not necessarily in a depressing way. I mean, for sure, we can say it's black and it's hard, and then the stone is hard, and the burden of the monotheism and the burden of the conflict is on the people's shoulder here all the time. People are carrying it, which is true. But again, it's I think it's also a situation when, because of the religion, or like due to the religion, you tend to occupy yourself with other things in life, not judging it in a positive or negative way, but just, you will wear something else less attracting.
I was just reminded of my trips. Whenever I'm in Israel, I spend time in Beersheba, and often I have to go for work to Jerusalem and then Ramallah. And now I was visualizing this change of colors from Beersheba, the reddish of the desert, but also the regular life. And then the drive to Jerusalem, I normally park in East Jerusalem in front of a YMCA in order to catch a bus to Ramallah. And you get that sense, also the tension that you have in Jerusalem. It's not just the traffic, but the tension. And once past the checkpoint of Kalandia, it's like changing mood once again. It's a city bustling with the people moving, the colors, the smells, and the greenish color, because we are now the mountains that we were talking about earlier. Fascinating trip. I really never thought about in this term. I want to move to your work. You recently published a blog post, which I found fascinating and I think very important, discussing the situation of COVID-19 in East Jerusalem. Can you tell us what's going on? How's the city under COVID, and how's the division between East Jerusalem and the rest of the city? How did COVID affect the population in different ways, and how the vaccination campaign is moving forward?
I'm not updated with the recent numbers, but generally speaking, there is a difference here between the Palestinian population and the Israeli population. Israelis are getting more and more the vaccinations. Again, not all Israelis. You have still ultra-Orthodox who won't take it. But it's still more than the Palestinians. And the gap, is related to a serious situation of fake news circulating throughout various social media platforms, mainly WhatsApp, which was popular until they decided to change their regulations and people moved to Telegram like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, but still WhatsApp is very dominant here, and also Facebook. And when I'm thinking, when I'm saying fake news, it's really posts and images and really misleading information about what the vaccine can do to you. All written in Arabic. Some of it is related to the local politics of the conflict. It's Bibi will do this and that, etc., but not just because there was sort of, again, misleading medical information and biological information of what the vaccine can do to you. A student of mine wrote a really interesting paper about a Facebook page in Arabic that its aim is to reveal fake news, and it was so active during it still is during the COVID-19 period. So you have here a really bad mix of, lack of trust between Palestinians and the Israeli authorities, because at the end of the day, the person that's adhering and calling the people to take the vaccines is Bibi Netanyahu and the Ministry of Health, etc. And usually they will speak in Hebrew. And the first announcements of the Ministry of Health will be in Hebrew, etc. And it took time to have all this information translated into Arabic. And at the very beginning, you had like an independent organizations here of activists and like local leaders that just took upon themselves to help people to understand what's going on. Now it's different because we are at the top of this crazy pandemic. At the top of how to deal with this pandemic in terms of the world, right? Or how people present it here, because we have so many vaccines that we can give away. But yet, not all of the people are coming to take it. It's a big question why, and why still it's not solved, the lack of trust, and why the fake news are so strong within this population of East Jerusalem, of Palestinian from East Jerusalem. It's a big question. It is, it's changing. But if you think about Israeli Palestinians who live inside Israel, inside the 48 territories, using this kind of terminology here, you have the same situation. Even though the vaccine is for free, everyone, are using the same health clinics. Also here in East Jerusalem, I use Clalit Health Clinic, and you have a big branch of Clalit in Sheikh Jarrah, and you can take the vaccine there, and it's the same, and yet it's not.
I was wondering if you think this is due to the politics, or there's also a bigger role played by conspiracy theory.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's both. I think it's the politics. It's first of all, you offer me something and I'll be suspicious about it, because of the politics, because of the conflict, because we are stronger than the Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Stronger, I mean, in terms of bureaucracy, in terms of deciding the rights of Palestinians, etc., etc. I also think, and I have to be very careful here and very modest, again, because I'm an Israeli and my baseline of conversation and discourse is not Palestinian at the end of the day. Although I read the language and my aim is to understand as much as I can. So when I think of conspiracy theories, I don't think that I can say it's just one conspiracy theory. I think it's a bunch of posts that are really made the people to be very afraid of, that a chip will be inside their body after taking the vaccine, etc. You also had very similar posts in Hebrew and also in English, so it's not a surprise. But again, in the Israeli side, it was less. It had less impact at the end of the day. Maybe it will be a bigger change now. I'm not sure.
Before we move to another topic, I just wonder if from your own perspective, from your own professional point of view, and I certainly sympathize with the fact that you are taking a step back. You're an Israeli, as you said. You certainly have access to the language and the Palestinian community. What is the legacy? What do you think may be the legacy of COVID-19 for East Jerusalem?
Mm-hmm. So I will be speaking about the field site that I have been working in the past 2 years, which I won't tell you its name in order to keep the people anonymous. But in the research, we called it Dar el Hawa. So what me and my colleague Dr. Laila Abed-Rabo saw there is that I would say a few things. First of all, you had an immediate mobilization of the community. And I think it happened in all sorts of places around the globe. I know for sure that in my neighborhood, it happened as well. So youngsters and people who, were already taking active roles within the community, all of a sudden pushed everyone to help the older people of the community. So that was a very moving thing to see. It didn't come out of nothing. The community that I was researching for 2 years is well known in this kind of delicate relationships among the people. Also because it has a lot of kinship with one another, which is very a common thing in East Jerusalem, that you will live in the same neighborhood or village, and it will be all sort of branch of your family. However, that was in the very beginning of the COVID-19. Everyone was at home helping each other, the communities together, etc., etc. But after a while, I would say the first closure, which was around 2 months, I think, or maybe a bit longer. I don't remember now. You started to see a sort of a resistance to the regulations and to the instructions. So still you had the community there in various levels. Like I'm part of a WhatsApp group, so of older people in this specific field site. So I saw what's going on and the activities that they try to do via Zoom, etc., etc. But I was also seeing, reading the news, reading the local Facebook page, making conversation with younger people there, etc., etc. And there was a resistance there of not following instructions, in terms of wearing a mask, social distancing, followed by not taking the vaccination, not taking the vaccine. Why? I think it's the politics of the conflict, that we cannot trust you, we cannot believe you, it's not the truth, but also because I think that sometimes, not all the times, usually the police, sometimes maybe the border police, didn't really enter the neighborhood in order to enforce, that the instructions. So maybe it was also part of that. I would say a sort of a resistance to the authorities.
We're going to take a short break. Please remember to join our Facebook page at Jerusalem Unplugged, as well as our Twitter and Instagram accounts. And if you have any idea for a future podcast, someone you want me to interview, or a topic that you want me to develop, please get in touch. Remember, enjoy, share, subscribe. Thank you for listening. It is an interesting parallel with other countries who followed more or less the same path. So a very long lockdown, and then ease the restrictions, and then going back into a lockdown. And I notice in a number of European countries, those who had the same pattern, that is exactly the same sort of behavior that people adopt. At first, they followed the rules, and then for different reasons, they decided not to. Certainly in America, it's different. We never really had a full lockdown. Therefore, it's hard to speak, to share the same, because it was never really everything closed. There were always avenues, particularly in some states, where people had more freedom. And and therefore never experienced this first wave, second wave, or third wave.
Yeah.
I want to move to another topic.
Mhm.
You gave a talk a few months ago, and you were talking about bilingualism.
Mhm.
You mentioned earlier you have two boys, and as far as I know, they attend a bilingual school.
Yad b'yad, hand in
Yad
hand.
b'yad, yes. Gosh, I wrote it.
Yes, that's right.
And I was not even able to read my own handwriting, as usual, I must say. Why choosing a bilingual school? What is bilingualism in Jerusalem in the 21st century?
Okay, so choosing hand-in-hand school is an ideological choice for both me and my husband. So going into a Jewish Arab school is going against the stream or against the norm here. We have different schools usually for Arabs and Jews. The education system is divided. Actually, both of my kids went to the YMCA school, which is a Jewish Arab kindergarten in King David Street, where you park your car when you come to Jerusalem. So for 5 years before they started elementary school, they attended a Jewish Arab kindergarten. And again, it was an ideological choice for us. Both of my husband and myself are speaking Arabic out of choice, out of individual studies that we did, not because we were in the intelligence forces of the Israeli army, which usually when an Israeli speaks Arabic, the immediate thought and concept that he or her went to the intelligence forces for 2 or 3 years. So we didn't do that, and it actually when I research and when I meet other parents in the school and I speak Arabic, so it really helps me the fact that I wasn't taking part in the intelligence forces and that my Arabic is not from there. It's from a different situation of being just a person that wants to know the language. It helps me also with my students at the Hebrew University, just to know the language, but also they're really afraid when I start speaking Arabic at the first time before they know me. And then I have to explain, I'm sorry, it's not from the intelligence forces. So yeah, I would say it's an ideological choice of just recognizing the mere fact that we are not alone here. Not, of course, not in Jerusalem, but also in Israel. And there are just other people that might be very helpful to understand what they're thinking, saying, to make acquaintance and friendships with them.
Other bilingual countries have chosen, paths to teach the same classes in two languages, like the example of Belgium, where Flemish and French are taught at the same level. Mixed results, but is also part of a cultural context. Yet they keep, focusing on this dual teaching. Do you see a future of bilingualism and teaching in both languages, in Israel and Palestine, but more importantly in Jerusalem? Do you think this could be the path to some sort of a form of reconciliation?
It's hard for me to imagine such an action around, schools in Jerusalem. Also in Palestinian schools, not all of them. Usually you will find Palestinians that that they know Hebrew much better than Israelis knowing Arabic, because it's just they need to know Hebrew. So it's always like that. The minority needs to mobilize itself and to take care of himself. If it will, if we'll have this utopia of schools teaching equal Hebrew and Arabic, if it will lead to a reconciliation, a little bit. It's very difficult to think of such situation of reconciliation. It's really difficult to imagine in this in this moment of the conflict, which is completely confusing because you have this agenda of two-state solution, but when you live in Jerusalem and you travel around the West Bank, which you did also when you were visiting here, Roberto, so I think you understand how difficult it will be to go that path. I think also, sorry, I have this thought that I have to take out. I think also in our school, it's not equal. My kids, they understand Arabic, but it's difficult to read. They don't have to use Arabic because all of their Palestinian teachers can speak Hebrew. And the Hebrew is very dominant. And it's dominant because the asymmetrical situation of the conflict, and it goes inside the school. It's really hard to avoid that. So it's not perfect also in our school, and they are working on it actually to try to change that problem.
Yeah, I was actually going to echo what you're just saying because I'm going to open to my sort of family here. My sister-in-law is one of the founder of the Agar School, which is another bilingual school. And one of my main criticism has always been the fact that while the school works greatly, and I really love what they're doing, but the moment kids stop going to school, there is no avenue to keep speaking or reading Arabic, because in the end, even their Palestinian friends and counterparts, particularly in the context of Beersheba, where you have some Bedouins or other Palestinians from the north that move there for work, but they end up to speak Hebrew because it's the dominant language. And you're right, this reflects the asymmetry of the conflict, where obviously you have one dominant side, and even the good deeds of working on the language, then they are diminished by the fact that there's no alternative, essentially. And yet, I believe this is a great move forward. I mean, the more people can access the language, the better.
I agree. I agree with you. I agree. I feel it every day. Every day I feel it, especially here in Jerusalem,
We are moving towards the end of this conversation. You're an ethnographer, but you also work on media. You're, I guess, journalist, also media journalist. I was wondering if you have anything, to share, perhaps related to your work, related to the relationship between media, social media, and Jerusalem. How does the city feature in social media? How do social media influence the city?
So I'll speak about East Jerusalem mainly because that was my my focus in the research. So it has its impact, definitely. And as in the rest of the world, this impact is changing because it if you're thinking now we are 2021, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, Facebook was much more salient in the region. It still is, but its role changed. So, I mean, if you're thinking of Facebook here in 2014, right, when you had the Gaza war, but also the very difficult, violent situation we had here in Jerusalem with Muhammad Abu Khder, etc. People were expressing themselves quite harshly via Facebook, politically wise. And you had many Facebook pages and groups also, but a lot of pages of people broadcasting their news and calling other people to take part and to be very active online. Quickly enough, again, because I mean Israel, controls also the social media, but also controls offline, underground. People stopped sharing and stopped expressing themselves about politics mainly. So it also happens today, right? You think twice and 3 times and even 5 times before you write politics online, unless you're a journalist on Twitter and that's your job. But as an ordinary person, as a lecturer, as a teacher, I mean, you don't have to be Palestinian to think before you write, because I mean, we all understood, the ramifications it might have on our lives. But, and again, I'm careful here. I think Palestinians here, at least in East Jerusalem, understood that as a minority group a little bit before me. The fact, it has a serious impact about their lives. I'm talking about political arrests, losing your job, being monitored, and also being monitored by the state, but also being monitored by your family, because it might have, ramifications on your family. And also as a woman, you have to be much more careful when sharing, when expressing yourself, etc. And again, yes, people were expressing also about, violent actions. And we say here in Hebrew, terrorism online. It's not my research, so it will be difficult for me to say exactly what I think about it, but definitely you have that side also. And it was also on Facebook. Again, it changed platforms, as in the rest of the world. But I think it happened a bit before the rest of the world here. Now, I mean, TikTok is very strong, and Facebook is Facebook. You read the news there, your family is there, and you still want to be there because you don't want to miss information, like the FOMO thing. But WhatsApp is very, very strong, being part of a group, having the option of personal communication. And Telegram also took its tone also during Covid-19, because, for example, the Ministry of Health opened the channel in Arabic in Telegram. So I know people were using that. Would it change the world, social media? A bit, a little bit. But I'm not optimistic that it will change, the political situation here.
I guess it's like using an Instagram filter. Sometimes we try to change the appearance, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is different in the end.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't know if it's a filter or if it's a plaster, a band-aid of making our life nicer, easier, etc. But I mean, it helps. It sort of helps of escaping, the conflictual situation here many times, and just have your life on Instagram. I know it from my students. I'm not an Instagrammer at all. I missed that step. But I had many conversations with my Palestinian students. I have 2 courses at the university teaching only Palestinians from East Jerusalem who were accepted to the university with the Palestinian grade, which is a new thing at the Hebrew University. And they're using Instagram a lot. And it was part of the conversation. It's just, moving away my thoughts from the situation here.
I have 2 more questions, and you can elaborate as much as you want on them. One is about your work. I know you're a very young lecturer and you're developing all of these teams, and I wonder if you can share perhaps a little bit what are your next projects, particularly if they're related to Jerusalem. And then after that, I have one last personal question.
Okay. So first of all, I'm actually in the middle of working on a monograph, writing that ethnography we did, me and Dr. Abed Rabo in Dar El Hawa, which is about old people and their digital experience as non-native digital. And the politics is very, very strong there, although they are old and they are not, activists in that matter. But the fact that they experience both 48 war and also the occupation or unification of Jerusalem in 67 has its tone on their course of life and on their way they use digital media. Part of it is because of the language. So if you were in Jerusalem after the 48 war, they will know Hebrew much more than their friends who were, occupied in 67. So that's a very interesting project that I'm working on, and it's a collaboration also with University College London, led by Daniel Miller, Professor Miller. And I'm also working of a project that I started within my PhD dissertation, again with a colleague, of what makes people not to participate online. And we are focusing also about, the socio-political circumstances and not just the politics, the mere politics of the conflict, which is sort of stating the obvious, but we're trying to get more deeper into, their decisions of when do I write, when do I don't write, etc. And it will also have a gender perspective in it. Yeah.
Fascinating. I see you have a very busy agenda. So I certainly wish you luck with that. I have one last question.
You.
Just to go back to the beginning, you were talking about your walks around Jerusalem, the calming effect of a city. You were talking about the mountains. So if you were to name, let's say 2 of your favorite spots in Jerusalem, what they would be?
Okay, so I thought about it. So the first place, it will be promenade here, the Armon HaNatziv promenade, which is 5 minutes walk from my apartment. And here I can really say that I discovered it during the Covid-19, during this really crazy year. Beautiful place. You have this view of the old city, but also it's open usually, and you can just sit and have a picnic there, and you have, you just have a variety of people coming from Jabal Mukaber, from Arnona neighborhood, and from Abu Tor, from down. So it's sort of a nature within the city and a green place within the city. It's calming and not calming at the same time, because you see the old city and you cannot forget what what the conflict is about. So I think that will be the first spot. And the second spot is a little cafe that I really like to go there, Silo Cafe. And happily and luckily, they were open the entire COVID situation because they have this really nice yard. So it was, they didn't break any rules within COVID-19. So I think it was, a little island of sanity, of normal urban life within the pandemic, but also within this contested space of Jerusalem.
This was Maya De Vries. Thank you for your contribution to Jerusalem Unplugged.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you.
While we wait for the next episode of Jerusalem Unplugged, please remember to subscribe to the podcast. Spotify, Amazon Music, iTunes, Stitcher, and all of the other platforms for which the podcast is available. Please also remember to like the Facebook page and subscribe to the feed, Jerusalem Unplugged, and also to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you. Until the next podcast.